The days following the trail gate incident felt like something out of a dystopian sitcom. Every time I passed that twisted piece of iron and keypad, I had to suppress the urge to go full Mad Max on it. But instead of swinging a sledgehammer, I swung open a manila folder filled with printed county records, zoning charts, and old land parcel scans. The deeper I dug, the more bizarre this thing got. That little strip of overgrown land Karen's road passed through? It was practically invisible on modern maps, which explained why the HOA never bothered with it. But the county archives painted a different picture. According to the records, it was a 0.52-acre plot classified as agricultural bufferland, still privately owned, not HOA managed, and listed under a name I hadn't seen in decades. Harold B. Cormack. That name jogged a memory. Old man Cormack used to sell eggs out of a roadside stand when I was a kid. He owned a massive farm that had mostly been sold off to developers years ago. I hadn't heard anything about him in a long time, but I had a hunch he wasn't the type to trust HOAs. I found an out-of-state address and mailed him a letter, then followed up with a phone call. No answer. I left a polite voicemail explaining who I was and why I was calling. 3 days later, he called back. His voice was gruff but steady, and when I told him the HOA had been using his land without permission for a private road, he laughed so hard he started coughing. He told me he'd refused to sell that strip back when the development started because they tried to lowball him. He called it his little act of protest, said they'd never respected the land, so he never gave them access to it. When I asked if he'd be willing to sell it to me, he said sure. He liked the idea of someone local using it to put the HOA in their place. The deal was surprisingly simple. He faxed over the paperwork, I had it notarized, wired the funds, and by the end of the week, I was the proud owner of the land that provided the only road in and out of Karen's HOA subdivision. It still didn't feel real. I stood out there one morning, coffee in hand, staring at the cracked asphalt that ran right across my property line. The irony was delicious. Karen had blocked a public trail because she felt entitled to her little patch of peace. And now, without realizing it, she and her entire community were driving across my land every single day. All I had to do was wait. I didn't go nuclear right away. That wasn't the plan. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to make a point. So I started small. I put up 2 modest signs on either side of the road, nothing dramatic. They read, "Private property. Entry by permission only." Below that, in smaller letters, "Landowner contact info available at County Clerk's office." That alone caused a ripple. Within 48 hours, HOA members began noticing the signs. Someone posted a picture of one on the community Facebook page with the caption, "What the heck is this?" The comments exploded. Some residents thought it was a prank. Others thought the county was planning to build something. Karen, true to form, claimed it was vandalism and threatened to call the sheriff. She actually did, and I was home when the deputy showed up. We'd met before. He was the same guy who had to untangle the paramedic fiasco. I showed him my new deed, explained the situation calmly, and even offered him coffee. He shook his head in disbelief and said, "Well, technically, you can do a lot more than just put up signs." He warned me that Karen was probably going to escalate, but as long as I wasn't obstructing traffic or endangering access, I was in the clear. I nodded, thanked him, and stood by the road while Karen stormed over from her house, fuming like she'd just lost a bake-off to her arch-nemesis. She shouted across the road, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I simply pointed at the sign and said, "My land. My rules." The next move was mine, but I still didn't want to cause unnecessary chaos. I decided to install a simple barrier system. Nothing fancy, just a swinging arm gate like the kind used in Forest Service roads. I posted a formal notice on the road, giving the HOA 72 hours to reach out regarding a formal access agreement. I even drafted a sample lease. Road use in exchange for reopening the trail and maintaining a community calendar for trail cleanup. Fair. Reasonable. But Karen didn't see it that way. She called an emergency HOA meeting and declared that I was holding their neighborhood hostage. She tried to rally the other homeowners to fight me in court. But the cracks were showing. Some residents began asking hard questions. Why hadn't the HOA secured the road in the first place? Why had they spent funds on a trail gate instead of confirming their legal access route? That weekend, things got real. I had contractors install the swing gate and a motion camera. The gate wasn't locked, just positioned to force cars to slow down and pass through one at a time. And yet, the uproar was instantaneous. Karen filmed herself driving up to it, dramatically slamming on the brakes, and pretending she couldn't pass. She uploaded it to the neighborhood group with the caption, "This is what tyranny looks like." Naturally, I screen-recorded the video, stitched it next to footage of her refusing to open the trail gate for paramedics, and posted it to Reddit with the title, "HOA Karen Meets Land Karma." It blew up overnight. Thousands of upvotes, dozens of reaction videos. One user commented, "This man just reversed a whole HOA." But the fallout was just beginning. The rest of the HOA board tried to get ahead of the bad press by reaching out to me behind Karen's back. They wanted to negotiate a compromise, afraid the situation might start affecting home values. I agreed to meet with them, on my property, of course. Karen wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway, pacing outside the gate like an angry mall cop. The board members apologized profusely, claiming they hadn't realized Karen's trail gate was unauthorized and promising to investigate. I told them my terms: remove the gate within 7 days, restore trail access, and issue a community apology. In return, I'd grant a renewable road easement agreement with no annual fee. It was the kind of deal that should have ended the conflict. But Karen wasn't interested in peace. The next morning, she submitted a cease and desist letter to my mailbox, claiming I was impeding public infrastructure and threatening legal action. She even printed it on HOA letterhead, which the rest of the board hadn't authorized. I sent a copy to the county legal office and waited. The county responded with a formal review request, for both the road access and Karen's unauthorized gate. Suddenly, she was under scrutiny from all angles. And yet, she doubled down, holding community meetings where she claimed I was a squatter trying to steal HOA land. She even tried getting people to sign a petition demanding eminent domain seizure of my property. That's when I decided to go public. I wrote a calm, fact-based post summarizing everything: how the trail was illegally blocked, how I legally purchased the access land, and how I offered a peaceful resolution. I included images of county documents, Karen's texts, and the trail gate blocking emergency crews. I didn't need to be dramatic. The truth was enough. The post went viral again. News stations reached out. Hiker groups staged small protests near the blocked trail. HOA members started coming to me privately to apologize. Some even offered to help clean the trail themselves. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was waking people up. The war wasn't over yet, but the momentum had shifted. Karen had built a gate to control a trail. I had bought a road to defend a principle. And now the very community she claimed to represent was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the hero of this story after all. I didn't expect my little experiment with the signs to cause such a stir so fast, but the minute those 2 plain boards went up, it was like I'd poked a hornet's nest that had been marinating in entitlement for years. Karen's reaction came swiftly and with theatrical flair. The morning after the signs appeared, I looked out my kitchen window and saw her marching toward them like she was leading troops into battle. She stood there, hands on her hips, reading each word aloud with exaggerated indignation. Then she pulled out her phone, snapped photos from every angle, and began filming herself in selfie mode, narrating a dramatic tale about how the trail anarchist had now declared war on the good, peaceful citizens of her neighborhood. She called me the rogue squatter and accused me of manufacturing a fake land claim to cause chaos. The camera panned over to my modest wooden fence as she said, This is what happens when you let outsiders buy property next to a respectable community. Outsider. I'd lived here longer than half the HOA had even owned their homes. That afternoon, I received a visit from a uniformed officer, not hostile, just curious. He had received a call about a potential land use violation and wanted to check things out. I invited him in, offered him a cold drink, and laid out the paperwork. The deed was clean, the zoning status was current, and the parcel was mine in full. He examined it carefully and nodded, saying it was all in order. Before leaving, he leaned in slightly and said, "Off the record, you've got her in a panic. Half the HOA is calling the station trying to figure out if you can legally shut them out." I smiled and said, "Only if they force me to." For a moment, things went quiet. Karen didn't confront me directly again for about 3 days, which was uncharacteristic. I assumed she was regrouping, maybe figuring out her next legal bluff. I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. On the 4th morning, a set of bright orange cones lined the access road through my land. Right at the center of my property line, someone had spray-painted a crooked white stripe and placed a laminated sign in the middle of the asphalt that read Temporary HOA Authority, under review. It was laughably fake. There was no permit number, no county seal, nothing even vaguely official. It looked like something a bored teenager would make for a prank, but there it stood, right in the path of everyone's morning commute. I called the county and sent them photos. They responded quickly, declaring the sign unauthorized and advising me to remove it. I did just that, yanking the plastic off and tossing the cones into a pile near my shed. That night, Karen marched up to the road again and shouted from across the fence, "You're tampering with official signage." I told her she should try submitting a real permit request next time. Her face turned red enough to fry an egg. She tried rallying support by calling a community meeting, handing out flyers at people's doors, and spreading rumors that I was planning to turn the trail into a private campground for profit. Some folks actually believed her. A few neighbors who used to wave at me stopped making eye contact. One even told me their kid had cried when they couldn't bike down the trail and blamed me for closing it. It stung, but I knew the only way to fix this wasn't through confrontation, it was through exposure. So I spent the next few evenings compiling a digital portfolio. I included county records of the trail's public designation, photos of the old signage before Karen removed them, and the history of the trail's connection to the surrounding community. I added a copy of my property deed, maps highlighting the access road's overlap with my parcel, and timestamps of the emergency response delay during the bike accident. I wrote a clear, level-headed post titled, "Why the Trail is Closed, and What the HOA Doesn't Want You to Know." I shared it on the local neighborhood app and on a few hiker forums. Within 24 hours, the comments section exploded. The community wasn't as brainwashed as Karen thought. Several long-time residents remembered hiking the trail when they were kids. One woman posted a photo of her grandfather building one of the old trail markers back in the 70s. A former HOA board member chimed in and admitted they had once tried to get the trail reclassified as HOA property and failed. The overwhelming sentiment turned fast. Suddenly, people were asking questions not about me, but about Karen. The pressure cooked quickly. A few homeowners confronted her directly at an HOA function. Someone recorded it and uploaded the video online. Karen stood at the podium, gripping the sides with white knuckles, trying to explain how she was just protecting neighborhood safety. A man in the audience shouted, "From what, joggers and squirrels?" That line got clipped and reposted as a meme. Karen versus squirrels. The final showdown trended on local Reddit threads. Karen retaliated the only way she knew how, by filing what she called a cease and desist letter against me. The envelope was stuffed in my mailbox with no postage, no lawyer's name, and printed in what looked like Comic Sans font. It accused me of disrupting community peace, endangering traffic, and threatening HOA stability. It warned me that continued interference would result in legal consequences. I read the whole thing twice and laughed so hard I nearly dropped it in my coffee. Still, I scanned and sent it to the county's legal liaison, just in case. They assured me that not only did the letter hold no legal weight, but it could constitute harassment depending on how far she pushed it. They encouraged me to keep documentation of everything and offered mediation resources in case the HOA tried to escalate officially. I filed the letter away in my growing folder titled, Karen Chronicles. Meanwhile, the swing gate was nearly ready. I had hired a small crew to install it at the end of my parcel, directly over the access road. It wasn't meant to block anyone. Just to control flow and make it crystal clear the land wasn't free real estate anymore. I picked a wooden design to match the forest aesthetic, even added solar lights for visibility. It opened easily, no locks, no barricades. Just presence. The day it went up, I stood beside it, arms folded, and watched the first few cars approach, hesitate, and slowly pass through. Some drivers waved. One gave me a thumbs up. Karen drove by last, glaring at the gate like it had personally insulted her mother. That night, she posted a furious screed online, accusing me of erecting illegal barriers to essential travel routes and conducting unlicensed land alterations. She claimed I was endangering emergency services again, even though the fire department had already inspected the gate and approved it as non-restrictive. The next day, a local news crew showed up. They had seen the Reddit thread, tracked the Facebook drama, and wanted an interview. I obliged. I walked them through the timeline, showed them the trail, the fake gate, the accident, the road acquisition. I didn't have to embellish anything. The facts were wild enough. Karen declined to comment but sent them a statement riddled with errors and vague accusations about an aggressive neighbor trying to destabilize our peaceful community. The segment aired that evening and within hours, the fallout was nuclear. Karen's credibility crumbled. Parents who'd lost access to their favorite hiking spot demanded action. A group of teenagers organized a peaceful protest, marching with signs that read, "Unlock the trail," and "Hiking isn't a crime." HOA board members started getting anonymous letters demanding a vote to remove Karen from her position. I hadn't even touched the road lease agreement yet, and the pressure was already imploding the power structure she'd built. I knew then that the real battle wasn't going to be fought with gates or fences. It was going to be fought with information, community support, and legal precision. And Karen? She was finally realizing that sometimes when you try to gate the world out, you end up locking yourself in. The morning after the news segment aired, everything felt strangely still, like the calm just before a summer storm breaks loose. My gate stood quietly across the access road, modest and unmoving, not a barricade but a statement. Birds chirped, a breeze rustled the tall grass at the edge of my property, and I sipped my coffee watching a few early commuters slow their cars as they passed through. There was no honking, no confrontation, just a silent understanding that something had changed. The passive respect from the residents felt like a silent nod in my direction. But that peace didn't last long. Not with Karen simmering on the other side of the neighborhood, bruised from the public backlash and desperate to regain control. Around mid-morning, I heard the sound of high heels click-clacking over pavement. I didn't even need to look up to know who it was. Karen stood on the far edge of the road, arms crossed, sunglasses too large for her face, and a clipboard clutched in one hand like it was a sword. She didn't step onto my land, not technically, but her voice carried like she owned the airspace. She accused me of colluding with the media to embarrass her, of coordinating a cyber harassment campaign by encouraging people to comment on HOA posts, and of violating some non-existent community stability clause. When I asked her to point out where in the county code that clause existed, she sputtered and turned back toward the cul-de-sac in a flurry of indignation. Later that afternoon, 2 more HOA board members came by without her. These weren't the loud, dramatic types like Karen. These were the quiet, weary ones. They admitted she'd gone rogue. Her stunt with the fake signs, her hostile cease and desist letter, and her refusal to listen to anyone who didn't agree with her were all becoming liabilities. They asked, carefully and respectfully, if I would consider attending the upcoming HOA meeting. Not as a guest, but as someone whose voice needed to be heard. They wanted to talk options for de-escalation. I agreed on one condition: they remove the illegal trail gate within 7 days. They hesitated, said they'd need to vote on it, but promised to bring it to the table. The HOA meeting was held in the local clubhouse, and I'll admit I half expected it to turn into a circus. But to my surprise, the room was packed with homeowners, not hecklers. Some had folding chairs in hand, others leaned against the walls. Several nodded at me as I walked in. A few whispered thank you. Karen, seated at the front table in a chair that looked too big for her tiny frame, glared like I had walked into her royal court without bowing. The meeting began with standard agenda items, but no one cared about garden fence heights or mailbox regulations. When the topic turned to the trail and the access road, the room tensed. Karen launched into a pre-written statement about safety, liability, and how the trail had become a breeding ground for vagrancy. She claimed she'd received anonymous complaints from residents afraid to use the neighborhood parks because of the hiker spillover. She waved around blurry photos of people walking dogs and riding bikes, trying to frame them as dangerous. Someone in the crowd actually laughed out loud. It broke her rhythm. Another homeowner stood and asked, "If you're so concerned about safety, why did you block paramedics from reaching that injured boy?" Karen stammered, said it was miscommunication, then accused me of manipulating public opinion. That was my cue. I stepped forward with my folder of documents. Calm, direct, no theatric. I presented the deed to the access road parcel, copies of the county's response to Karen's unauthorized signage, and the trail's official designation as a public path. I explained how the trail had existed long before the HOA, how it was loved by residents and visitors alike, and how I had maintained it out of my own pocket. I showed the lease proposal I had offered: road access in exchange for reopening the trail, no money involved. Just mutual respect. The room was silent by the end. One elderly gentleman in the back whispered, "That's the best HOA proposal I've ever heard." Karen tried to regain control, shouting about legal threats and false easements, but the mood had shifted. A board member called for a vote right there, whether to accept my lease and remove the trail gate. The results were overwhelming. Out of 38 homes, 34 voted yes, 2 abstained, and only Karen and her closest ally voted no. Just like that, the HOA officially agreed to remove the gate. Karen stood up and stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door behind her. It was the last time she presided over a meeting as HOA president. The gate removal took place 2 days later, and I was there to watch every bolt get unscrewed. A small crowd had gathered: neighbors, hikers, a few local reporters with notepads in hand. One guy from a local YouTube channel streamed it live. The moment the metal structure came down, someone cheered. Then someone else brought donut. It turned into a spontaneous celebration. Parents with kids on bikes took turns riding the trail for the first time in weeks. Joggers high-fived each other. My dog Max, who had watched the entire drama unfold with canine patience, finally got to chase his tennis ball down the full length of the trail without a barrier. I don't think I'd seen him run that happy since puppyhood. With the trail reopened and the gate gone, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. People who had once seemed distant now waved when I passed. Some even stopped to chat and ask about how they could help keep the trail clean. I received a thank you card from a teacher whose school used the trail for their science walk. One young boy, the same one who had cried when the trail closed, brought me a drawing of a big gate with a red X over it and a stick figure with a cape labeled Trail Hero. I tacked it up on the fridge. But Karen didn't disappear entirely. Over the next week, she filed 3 complaints with the zoning board, 2 anonymous letters to the editor in the local paper, and tried launching a petition to overturn the HOA's decision. None of them gained traction. The board formally voted to strip her of leadership duties, citing misconduct and unilateral decision-making. Her ally on the board resigned quietly. The HOA issued a community newsletter with a formal apology and a new direction emphasizing transparency and collaboration. It was a sea change. The neighborhood wasn't just recovering from the drama, it was reinventing itself. A few days later, I returned to the spot where the gate once stood. I had brought a new wooden sign with me, hand-carved, simple, and clean. It read, "Welcome to Willow Trail. Respect nature. Respect neighbors." I installed it with Max sitting beside me, tail thumping. As I finished, a young couple walked by, pushing a stroller. They stopped, admired the sign, and thanked me for everything. I nodded, feeling something settle inside me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just balance. Karen still lived at the end of the street, though her house had gone up for sale. I heard through the grapevine she was moving closer to her sister's place in another state. As for me, I had no plans to leave. I had too many roots here, too many memories carved into these trees and trails. And now, a renewed sense that sometimes, when you fight with patience, precision, and just enough stubbornness, the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. That night, as the sun set over the woods, casting long shadows over the reopened path, I sat on the bench I'd built years ago, watching kids bike through the trees, couples walk hand in hand, and dogs bound through the grass. The trail was alive again. And so was the community it had always quietly connected. I thought once the trail was reopened and the gate removed, things would settle into a new rhythm, one where peace replaced pettiness and common sense finally ruled over chaos. And for a short while that actually happened. Neighbors who once stayed behind closed blinds now came out to walk the trail. People smiled again. The HOA sent out its first friendly newsletter in years, thanking residents for their input and inviting them to participate in an upcoming community planting day. I even got invited to lead the opening ceremony for the newly restored trail, which I politely declined, preferring to watch from a distance with Max and a thermos of coffee. But I should have known. With Karen still living just 5 houses down from the access point, the calm wasn't going to last. She tried to keep her distance at first. She didn't show up to meetings. She didn't yell from the sidewalk. She didn't even post her usual tirades in the HOA group. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels staged. Then one afternoon I came home to find a small wooden structure sitting in the middle of the trail, not far from where her property backed up to the tree line. It looked like a glorified lemonade stand, but had a hand-painted sign hanging off the top beam, HOA Security Checkpoint. Below it, another sign read, "All trail visitors must sign in." Next to that, a fold-out table with a notebook and pen. I stood there blinking at it like it was a hallucination. I walked right past it, didn't touch a thing, and waited. Less than 10 minutes later, Karen emerged from the woods like she was a park ranger on patrol. She was wearing a reflective vest, and had a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. She waved her arm like she was flagging down traffic and barked, "You didn't sign in." I asked her what exactly I was signing in for, and she responded with some nonsense about increased security measures and trail usage tracking. I reminded her, again, that the trail was public land and had no legal requirement for visitors to log their presence. She replied, "Well, the HOA has its own standards, and we can require additional procedures for bordering residents." I said, "No, you can't." She said, "Maybe a court should decide." I laughed and walked away, but not before snapping a photo. That evening, I posted the picture online. It didn't take long before local forums picked up the story. The comments were brutal. People joked about her running a border crossing checkpoint or trying to start her own neighborhood militia. One user photoshopped her head onto a military general's body and captioned it, "General Karen, defending the homeland one trail at a time." Another created a fake HOA passport that said, "Valid for one walk only, please don't breathe too loud." But while the jokes were funny, the underlying issue was serious. She was escalating again, and this time, her delusion was spilling back into public property. I sent the photo and a formal complaint to the county parks office. They responded quickly, clearly fed up with the drama by now. A ranger was dispatched the next day to inspect the trail. I watched from my window as he approached the wooden checkpoint, scribbled something in his notepad, and then knocked on Karen's door. She came out arguing before he even said a word. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see the wild gestures, the way she pointed at the trees like they were part of some invisible boundary only she could see. Eventually, he took out a cordless drill and unscrewed the makeshift structure from the dirt. She stood there, defeated but still muttering, as he hauled it away in the back of his truck. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, Karen filed a complaint with the HOA accusing me of operating a commercial business on community-adjacent land without authorization. She claimed I was charging hikers for private tours and running an illegal outdoor fitness class. The board was forced to address it during the next meeting, which turned into a public roasting. Not only were her claims baseless, but 2 of the very people she accused of being my customers were actual members of the HOA, one of them a retired librarian who led weekend poetry walks on the trail. After the meeting, the board formally censured her, issuing an official warning and reminding all members that the HOA had no jurisdiction over county land. Karen left without saying a word, but her face was red enough to stop traffic. That was when she turned to the shadows. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. One morning I found trash strewn across the entrance to the trail, plastic wrappers, torn paper, even broken glass. I cleaned it up, not thinking too much of it, until it happened again. And again. I installed a motion sensor camera hidden in the bushes, aimed at the entrance. It didn't take long to capture the culprit. There she was, under the cover of darkness, tiptoeing out in pajamas, dumping a bag of junk and scurrying back toward her house like a raccoon in heels. I didn't post that footage. Not right away. I gave it to the sheriff's office first, along with a list of times and cleanup logs. They paid her a visit. She claimed she was spreading biodegradable compost for the soil. They informed her that candy wrappers, crushed soda cans, and torn receipts didn't count as compost. Then she tried flyers. Printed on neon paper and taped to utility poles, the flyers warned residents about unregulated wildlife activity near the trail and urged them to report suspicious animal presence. It would have been ridiculous if it wasn't also slanderous. She included a blurry photo of my dog Max and circled him in red with the words "potential threat" scribbled underneath. That was the last straw. I had tolerated the gate, the lies, the complaints, but targeting Max? That hit below the belt. So I crafted my own response, not with anger, but with clarity. I organized a Trail Appreciation Day, invited the local ranger to give a talk, the county representative to speak on public land access, and even got a few local vendors to set up booths for hikers. Over 70 people showed up. Kids painted birdhouses, seniors did guided nature walks, and Max wore a little bandana that read Official Trail Guide. At the end of the day, the county unveiled a new wooden trailhead sign funded through a local grant, permanently marked with the words, "Willow Trail, protected public land, open to all." It was my way of closing the loop. Karen watched the entire event from behind her blinds, peeking through them like a villain in a children's cartoon. She didn't come out. Not once. After that, the flyers stopped. The trash stopped. And for the first time in months, she said nothing at all. The silence was almost unnerving, but it was a silence I could live with. Weeks later, her house went on the market. The listing used carefully neutral language. Charming property at the end of a cul-de-sac, quiet neighbors, scenic walking trail nearby. I chuckled at the irony. The same trail she tried to destroy now boosted the value of her home. I watched realtors bring people by. None of them stayed long. I could only imagine what her version of the house tour sounded like. This is the front porch, and over there is the evil land baron who ruined everything with his peaceful walking path and happy dog. But in the end, I didn't need her to move to feel satisfied. I didn't need to win. The trail was open. The road was respected. The community had seen the truth and responded. Max got belly rubs from strangers nearly every day. And the path, once blocked and forgotten, now stood tall as a symbol of resilience, not because of fences or ownership, but because of the people who fought for access and peace with patience instead of rage. As summer deepened, wildflowers bloomed across the edge of the trail. The sun filtered through the trees with that golden hue that only shows up when nature feels unbothered. Max and I would walk the trail in the early mornings, not because we were guarding it anymore, but simply because it had returned to what it was always meant to be. A path, open and free. A place where people could pass without judgment, and where even the most ridiculous conflicts eventually faded beneath the rustle of leaves and the crunch of honest footsteps. The first sign that Karen was finally giving up wasn't the "for sale" sign on her front lawn or the way her blinds stayed permanently shut. It was the silence. The neighborhood had grown used to her voice echoing down the sidewalks, whether she was ranting to the mail carrier about HOA bylaws or barking at joggers for walking too close to her property line. But now there was nothing. No flyers. No walkie-talkie patrols. No homemade signs duct-taped to trash cans. It was like she'd melted into the background, a shadow of the woman who once tried to rule the trail like a medieval warden. People started joking that maybe she'd finally moved into her own imaginary gated community. Even Max, my dog, noticed the change. He stopped growling at her house when we passed by and instead wagged his tail at the smell of fresh-cut grass and a world that had grown lighter without constant tension tugging at its seams. One afternoon, I got a call from one of the newer HOA board members, a younger guy named Miguel who'd recently moved in and had been instrumental in turning the tide against Karen's antics. He said they wanted to host a formal rededication ceremony for the trail and asked if I'd consider speaking. I laughed and told him I was more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. He said that's exactly why people wanted to hear from me. So, reluctantly, I agreed. Not for the attention, but because it felt like the final page of a chapter that had needed closure for a long time. That weekend, they set up a simple stage near the trailhead with folding chairs and a PA system powered by a small solar panel. Kids decorated the area with ribbons and paper trail markers, and someone even baked cookies shaped like little hiking boots. The crowd that gathered was bigger than I expected. There were hikers from the nearby county, residents from our neighborhood, a few county officials, and even the ranger who had helped tear down Karen's fake checkpoint. Everyone clapped when Miguel introduced me. I stepped up to the mic, looked out over the smiling faces, and kept it simple. I talked about how trails are more than dirt paths and trees. They're connections. Not just from one place to another, but between people. I said this trail had connected generations. Grandparents who walked here with their kids, joggers who met their future spouses on these bends, and little kids like the boy who once drew me as a caped hero just for keeping it open. I ended by saying that protecting something doesn't always mean building walls. Sometimes it means tearing them down. After the applause faded and people began mingling, I walked down the trail with Max trotting beside me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could exhale completely. There was no more war to fight, no more ridiculous threats to untangle. I stopped at the spot where Karen's gate had once stood and sat down on the bench. Someone had added a small plaque to it. It read, "For those who kept the path clear, thank you." I didn't know who had put it there, but I smiled and let Max curl up at my feet while I watched the sunlight filter through the canopy above. Later that evening, as I returned home, I noticed something strange. Karen's yard was completely bare. No lawn ornaments, no patio furniture, not even the ceramic frog statues she used to line up by the walkway like little soldiers. A moving truck was parked in her driveway, half filled with boxes and what looked like her infamous clipboard tossed haphazardly on the passenger seat. I didn't see her come out. Maybe she left early, or maybe she didn't want a spectacle. Either way, by the next morning, she was gone. Her house sat empty, a hollow shell of misguided control and burnt-out entitlement. I didn't feel triumphant watching her leave. I just felt relieved. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the neighborhood found new footing. The HOA, free of Karen's overreach, began focusing on things that actually mattered, like fixing the broken community mailbox and organizing neighborhood cleanup. Miguel led a tree planting initiative along the trail edge, and I offered to help map out future expansions that would connect it to the larger greenbelt nearby. Kids started drawing chalk art on the path again. Parents pushed strollers through the woods without having to explain to their toddlers why a lady in a vest was yelling about rules. Even the squirrels seemed less anxious. Then one morning I received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. The note read, "I was wrong. You were right. Use this however you want." It was signed with just the letter K. I stared at it for a while, unsure if it was real or another one of Karen's mind games. But I knew that handwriting. After months of confrontation and chaos, she had left something behind, a quiet admission, maybe even a truce. The key, I later discovered, was to the trail gate padlock she had installed before the county removed it. Useless now, but symbolically it meant everything. I mounted that key on a small wooden plaque and hung it in my tool shed beside the original trail map and a photo of Max standing proud in his trail guide bandana. It served as a reminder that even the most stubborn walls can fall, and even the most stubborn people can change, even if only a little. And maybe, just maybe, Karen learned something too. Or maybe she just didn't want to end up in another neighborhood with someone like me living next door. As fall rolled in, the leaves turned gold and orange along the trail, carpeting the path with color. Max loved diving into the piles as I raked, scattering them again with wild energy. People often stopped to pet him, ask how things were going, or share stories about their favorite moments on the trail. One woman said she'd met her fiancé during the trail appreciation event and asked if I'd consider hosting another one next spring. I said sure, but only if someone else handled the cookies this time. I wasn't brave enough to bake. The neighborhood was different now, not perfect, but better. There was trust again. There was laughter. Even disagreements were handled like adults, without secret meetings or dramatic declarations. The trail had brought us back to center. It reminded everyone that shared spaces don't require control, they require care. It wasn't mine alone anymore. It belonged to all of us, and somehow that made it even more worth protecting. Max and I still walk it every day. Sometimes we go early in the morning, while the mist still hugs the ground. Other times we wait until dusk, when the sun makes the trees glow like stained glass. We've seen families grow, friendships form, and a community come back to life. And every time I pass the old gate site, I glance at the spot where Karen once stood shouting about trespassers and authority, and I smile, not out of spite, but because that place is quiet now. It echoes only with footsteps, laughter, and the wind rustling through the branches above. If you ever find yourself on that trail, you might notice the worn earth where 100 feet pass each week. You might feel the peace that took so long to reclaim. And if you see a border collie bounding ahead with a bandana tied around his neck, wagging like he's the king of the forest, just know you're in the right place. The gate is gone. The road is clear. The fight is over. And the path is finally, undeniably, open.